What happens when a respected judge humiliates a black man for offering a helping hand? You will not believe the hidden evidence that turned the entire courtroom upside down. What unfolded next left every witness utterly speechless. I never thought tying on a smile and offering a helping hand could turn me into public entertainment. But here I am, James J. Harrison, caught in the glare of courtroom spotlights, wondering how a simple gesture exploded into a full-blown ordeal. That morning, I spotted Mr. Watkins, an elderly man with a silver cane wobbling under the weight of 2 grocery bags. His shoulders stooped as though they carried the weight of every hard year he'd lived. I couldn't pass by. I stepped forward, caught one bag before it tore open, and said, "Here you go, sir. Let me take you through." His eyes lit with relief, and for a split second, I felt the warmth of doing something right in this crooked world. We moved across the courthouse lobby, its marble floor gleaming like a showroom, and its pillars towering like judges themselves. The hush of hushed whispers and clacking heels formed a quiet symphony around us. People peeked over their phones, judges paused mid-sentence, and the bailiff glanced up from his clipboard, surprised to see kindness in action. I remember thinking, this is how it should be. People looking out for each other. Then the heavy thud of Judge Marcus Hoffman's gavel shattered the calm. He sat high on his bench, his dark robes swirling around him like a thundercloud, ready to rain down stormy judgment. He peered over his glasses at me, his lips curling into something that smelled more like disdain than curiosity. "Who is this?" he barked. "This is not a charity recital. We have serious business here." I felt the temperature drop. In that instant, every head turned, and not with admiration. The crowd's eyes narrowed, searching for confirmation that this intruder didn't belong. I opened my mouth to explain, but the judge waved me down with an impatience that burned. "Sit, now." As I slid into the wooden pew beside the defendant's bench, I caught reflections of me on a dozen smartphone screens. The court reporter paused her fingers above her stenography machine, as though even she wondered why my act of kindness had drawn such fury. Murmurs swirled. "Is he a lawyer? Why's he here? Get back in line." My heart hammered against my ribs, a taunting drumbeat reminding me how out of place I felt. At 20 years old, I'd volunteered at community centers, tutored neighborhood kids, driven strangers to hospital appointments, always believing that helping was its own reward. But today, my reward was a spotlight of suspicion, and my goodwill was treated like a stunt. I shifted in my seat, dusting invisible lint off my suit jacket as if it could ward off the judge's glare. My palms were slick against the bench. I caught my reflection in a brass plaque reading, "Judge Marcus A. Hoffman." The name alone carried decades of authority and, apparently, a personal vendetta against empathy. Across the room, the public gallery buzzed with cell phone cameras capturing every tense second. A few sympathetic faces peeked from the back row. Community activists, perhaps, or old-timers who'd seen too many like me get chewed up by a system built to grind down spirits. One woman gave me a quick, reassuring nod. It was enough to remind me why I'd refused to look away when Mr. Watkins needed help. Then came the prosecutor's voice, a sleek whisper cutting through the courtroom tension like a scalpel. "Your Honor, this individual disrupted proceedings," she said, glancing at me with a practiced smirk. "He interfered in the case by inserting himself where he does not belong." I move that we exclude his statements on behalf of the defendant. I clenched my jaw. Exclude my statements? As if my support for the defendant's innocence was contamination. I felt a surge of anger, bitter and bright, flash through my veins. The judge hesitated, as though weighing my humanity against his rigid rulebook. Then he slammed down the gavel again. Sustained! Just like that, my act of kindness was declared inadmissible, my voice silenced by prejudice masquerading as procedure. A cold laugh bubbled up in my throat, but I swallowed it. I couldn't let them see me break. Not here, not now. I straightened my back, squared my shoulders, and prepared for the next wave of injustice. Because if they wanted a show, I'd give them a performance. One that would prove courage and compassion cannot be outlawed. What happened next changed everything. You will not want to miss how this turned around. I could feel the courtroom air crackle like a live wire as the cameras kept rolling. Every flick of a gavel, every shuffle of papers felt amplified in my ears. Judge Hoffman glared at me like I'd just insulted his mother. His eyes burned with that familiar mixture of annoyance and entitlement, the kind that says, "You have no right to be here, son." And yet, I was exactly where I needed to be. When the prosecutor finished her smug little speech, I rose to my feet again. My heart kicked against my rib cage, but my voice stayed steady. "Your Honor," I said, projecting calm I did not feel, "I have more evidence that speaks directly to your court's integrity." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Some people leaned forward in their seats, while others snapped photos. I could almost taste their surprise. The judge scowled. "Proceed," he snapped. I stepped toward the bench and placed a slim envelope before him. Inside this envelope is a video of your private meeting with Prosecutor Daniels. It demonstrates explicit instructions to withhold exculpatory evidence against my client. I paused to let it sink in. The judge's jaw clenched, his face draining of color. Even the prosecutors in the well looked away, half-shamed. "And you expect us to accept this?" Hoffman sneered, brushing aside the envelope as if it were yesterday's junk mail. "Yes, sir. Because it is exactly what happened." I squared my shoulders. I have the unedited footage. I have the timestamps. And I have the witness testimony from the clerk who recorded it. I tapped the envelope. I will submit it to the court in full. The judge slammed his gavel so hard the whole bench rattled. "Objection overruled. Leave the bench." His voice shook with fury. The bailiff almost knocked me over in his rush to pull me away. But I did not flinch. As I was escorted back to the defense table, I felt the energy shift. The prosecutor sputtered behind me. "Contempt!" But her words sounded hollow. The whispers had turned into excited chatter. "He's got them cornered." "Did you see his nerve?" This is history in the making. Even the reporters were trading glances that said, "You go, boy." Sitting down, I caught a glimpse of my client, Ms. Ramirez, tears of relief glistening in her eyes. She mouthed, "Thank you," and I gave her a small nod. We had become an unspoken team. She, the woman robbed of justice, and I, the man who refused to let a crooked system swallow her whole. The judge called for recess, and the room erupted into motion. Lawyers huddled, assistants buzzed around with documents, and the gallery buzzed like bees around honey. I leaned over to Ms. Ramirez. "We're not out of the storm yet," I whispered, voice low but fierce. "But we've broken through the first wall." Outside the courtroom, I found my phone glowing with notifications. text messages from community leaders, social media alerts from activists, even a tweet from a state senator praising the exposure of corruption. It felt like lighting a fuse under a powder keg. When we reconvened, the charged atmosphere was impossible to ignore. Hoffman glared at me again, but there was something different this time, a flicker of uncertainty. He flipped through the envelope, his face a mask of disbelief, then crumpled the papers in his hand. "The court will review this evidence," he growled. "We will reconvene after verifying its authenticity." As the gavel fell, I sank back into my seat, adrenaline flooding my veins. I felt alive in a way I had never experienced, like I was part of something bigger than one courtroom, bigger than one case. I'd taken the system's cornerstone, its so-called impartiality, and smashed it against the hard rock of truth. By the time I glanced up at the public gallery, the entire room was staring. Some faces beamed with hope, others scowled in anger, but every single eye was on me. It was a moment of pure electric power, proof that exposing corruption was more than a legal maneuver. It was a statement. I swallowed a lump of pride and fear, straightened my tie, and prepared for the final act of this showdown. Because if they thought they'd seen defiance already, they had another thing coming. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay tuned to see how I put them all in their place. I could feel the weight of every stare in that courtroom as we reconvened. Judge Hoffman sat perched on his bench, muttering into his robe as he rifled through the envelope's contents like they were poisoned documents. For a moment, his authority seemed unshakable, until the bailiff stood, cleared his throat, and announced the unthinkable. "Your Honor, the evidence has been authenticated." Silence fell harder than any gavel. Journalists raised their cameras, spectators leaned forward, collective breath held tight. I looked at Ms. Ramirez, her hands trembling but her gaze fierce. All those nights poring over files, chasing down witnesses, it came down to this pivot point, a single certified video clip exposing the judge's own misconduct. Hoffman's eyes flicked to the prosecutor, then back to me, as though he expected me to vanish into thin air. He didn't. I stood fully upright, shoulders back, heart pounding like church bells on Sunday morning. "Your Honor," I said, voice calm enough to belie the fire burning in my veins, "the court's impartiality depends on accountability. If one person, the highest authority in this room, can orchestrate a cover-up, then none of us are safe from corruption." A murmur spread. Some spectators nodded, others gasped. Even attorneys in the gallery stiffened at the blunt truth. The judge's face flushed. His mouth snapped shut, but his eyes betrayed the storm raging behind his stoic facade. Then came the moment every advocate dreams of. The gavel came down not to silence, but to demand honesty. "We will hear testimony from the clerk who recorded the meeting," Hoffman rasped, voice now tight with unease. "Proceed." The clerk, a quiet young woman with fierce determination, took the stand. She described how the judge and prosecutor had met behind closed doors, plotting to suppress key witness statements. She spoke of hushed instructions, of files moved, emails deleted. Each detail landed like a hammer blow against the court's integrity. By the time she finished, Hoffman's robe looked too big for him. His power deflated, his posture curled like wilted paper. Even the prosecutor slumped, her confident veneer cracked. The courtroom no longer felt like a fortress of the privileged. It was a stage where truth had found its microphone. I glanced at Ms. Ramirez, whose eyes were bright with unshed tears. Her case, once teetering on a stack of manipulated evidence, now stood on solid ground. She rose, voice quavering with relief and awe. "Your Honor, I never imagined I'd see justice this way." The simple words resounded louder than any speech. The judge cleared his throat, glanced at the jury box, then spoke with a vulnerability that startled us all. "This court deeply regrets the breach of trust. Effective immediately, I recuse myself, and this case will be reassigned to a fair tribunal." A ripple of applause swept through the gallery, quick, respectful, yet unstoppable. It was as if the building itself exhaled after years of holding its breath. I felt pride swell in my chest, not just for winning a case, but for proving that one person's refusal to bow to injustice can topple the mightiest walls. Outside the courtroom, news crews swarmed. Reporters called for statements. Activists organized rallies. Social media exploded with the hashtag #Truth Under Oath. Ms. Ramirez and I gave a brief joint statement. We fought for fairness, and in doing so we reminded everyone that silence is the ally of corruption. In the following days, the State Judicial Council launched an inquiry. Hoffman faced disciplinary proceedings. The prosecutor was reassigned. The clerk received commendations for bravery. For Ms. Ramirez, the charges were dropped, her record cleared. She walked out a free woman, greeted by family and friends who had camped outside the courthouse for days. Late that evening, I sat alone on the courthouse steps, the building bathed in golden lamplight. I thought about how kindness, helping an old man with groceries, had set this all into motion. A small gesture in a vast system, yet it rippled outward like a rock, causing tidal waves. Justice is not a window dressing. It is a living, breathing principle that requires constant vigilance. I rose and walked away from those steps, knowing that while one battle was won, the war against prejudice and corruption carries on. But that night, I carried with me the fierce conviction that every act of courage, no matter how small, can ignite a revolution of integrity.